Thanks to everyone who's joining us today, and welcome to this co-op conversation. It's the last one of the season, so we're delighted to be here. My name is Natalie Kellio. I'm the Professional Research Associate with the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, and your host and moderator today, filling in for our esteemed director, Marc-André Pigeon. I acknowledge I am coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples for millennia, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We are grateful for this opportunity to work on this land and reaffirm our commitment to the hard, shared, and necessary work of reconciliation. This includes committing this week, in particular, to concrete actions and calls to justice to end violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirited, and LGBTQIA+, particularly this week as we mark Red Dress Day this Friday here on Treaty 6 territory and across Turtle Island. I am delighted to introduce you to today's featured speakers. You may have heard the term gray wave used to describe the impending wave of baby boomer retirements that have been looming for years and some now predict is imminent. In 2021, 1 in 5 Canadians of working age were aged 55 to 64, and this is an all-time high. For Canada's small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, the gray wave poses the possibility of large-scale closures due to the growing number of retired owners, particularly for the many SMEs that lack a formal succession plan. But it doesn't have to be that way. I'm delighted to introduce you to our featured speakers today, who propose a sound and viable alternative converting such businesses to cooperatives. First, Dr. Marcelo Vieta is an associate professor in adult education and community development and co-founder and director of the Centre for Learning, Social Economy and Work at my alma mater, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. Marcelo has written extensively on cooperatives, including the books Cooperatives at Work and Workers' Self-Management in Argentina. He is the lead researcher of the Co-opConvert project, which we will be talking about a lot more very shortly. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Fiona Duguid. Fiona holds a PhD in adult education and community development, also from OISE at the U of T. Fiona is an assistant professor in the Shannon School of Business MBA program at Cape Breton University, an adjunct professor in the St. Mary's University Cooperative Business Management program. She's also the current president of the Canadian Association for the Study of Cooperation. I'm sure many people are getting ready for the conference, and research co-lead of the Co-opConvert project. A bit about process before we begin. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, our featured speakers will be talking about moving beyond crises and converting workplaces and community spaces to cooperatives in Canada and beyond. And then we three will have a very short conversation, followed by all of us breaking out into group discussions around a question posed by our guests for about 15 minutes. So one of the things we hear over and over again about these co-op conversations is that our participants value the opportunity to network. These breakouts are meant to make that happen, to be enriching to you as individuals, but also in your capacity with your organizations. When we reconvene, we will regroup, share a bit, and wrap up. If anyone is experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Stan Yu. Stan, please wave.
Hi, everyone.
And he will be available to assist, so just send him a chat. We will be recording this session, as you can see, and the link will be shared with everyone who registered. All of that will be emailed to you sometime after today's talk. Now, Marcelo and Fiona, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I will share my screen and get this ball rolling. You can all see that? Okay, so moving beyond crises of all kinds, converting workplaces and community spaces into co-ops in Canada is what we want to talk about today. Here's the outline of our discussion. I'll just give you a brief intro of the Co-opConvert project, which we've been doing since 2018. I'll give you then a landscape high-level overview of BCCs in Canada, how many, what sectors, where. Hand it off to Fiona. We'll talk about BCC case studies. Come back to me, BCC ecosystems and what we need to improve them and where they're found in particular, where they're found more robustly in Canada, and then open it up to discussions. All right, so the Co-opConvert project, or the Conversions to Cooperatives project, is a university community-based partnership that began in 2018, funded by SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, in cooperation with Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada. They're our community partners. So the idea is to bridge university research with community needs. And so we partnered with initially Co-ops and Mutuals Canada, also Épicerie in Quebec at the University of Sherbrooke, but also over the years brought in or partnered with other cooperative leaders in Canada, such as the Canadian Cooperative Federation, Ontario Cooperative Association, BCCA, ACCA, and others that we've worked with. So that's the point of this type of partnership, and the Government of Canada really likes these partnerships to extend. And really the research is about and for the co-op sector in Canada and beyond as well. So, okay, so what were the motivations for the project? Well, you're probably all familiar to some extent or another with the gray tsunamis, another term that's being used for the vast swaths of business owners and businesses, SMEs, that are up for succession because of retiring boomers. There's 1.2 million SMEs in Canada, and that's the great portion of the Canadian economy is driven by small and medium-sized enterprises. Most jobs are found in them. And so this is a big deal when 72% of small business owners plan to retire over the next decade, but only 14% of them have a formal plan for succession. And about 60% of SME owners are over 50. So that's a potential problem, especially when they don't have a plan for succession. There's also trillions of dollars at stake. And then you have something that none of us could have predicted, COVID-19, and what that threatened, how that threatened the Canadian economy, jobs, and small and medium-sized businesses. And there's probably more crises to come like that are unexpected. And so what can we do about it? How can the cooperative movement facilitate this? Well, there's something that remains hidden in Canada mostly, and that's business conversions to cooperatives. There's no solid policies in place across Canada, as you find in other parts of the world, but there's some successful examples in Canada. And there's regions, provinces like Quebec that have richer environments. So what we set out to do was to map and document business conversions to cooperatives, map out their potential for meeting these needs of addressing these potential crises in the Canadian economy, and learning from them, and then possibly contributing to policy that would make this more robust. So there aren't many in Canada, as we find in other parts of the world, conversions to cooperatives, but there are more than a handful. There are several hundred of them, and most of them are concentrated in Quebec. So we built this database. One of the goals of our project was to document them, build a database in conjunction with the cooperative sector. So they're present, BCCs are present across Canada. We've tracked about 255 of them. Currently, these are 2021 numbers. We are updating our stats. 191 at the time we're active. Now we're up to about 225. Interestingly, many housing co-ops were conversions, but we just couldn't secure enough data. We tracked about 77 of them, but we know there are many more. So we left this out of this project. But if you include housing co-ops, then you're dealing into the 500s perhaps, or the several hundred conversions to co-ops. So, and most of the conversions to co-ops are found in Quebec, and many stay active. So about 77% of the ones that we tracked did not close afterwards, but are still active. They're present across the economy, but in particular, they cluster around labor-intensive services and information, professional, health, and social services. We find another cluster in education and cultural industries, and we do find about 12% of them in manufacturing as well. So they can be done in any kind of sector, in any kind of environment, but small and medium-sized businesses in the services sector that are labor-intensive rather than capital-intensive seems to be the trend in Canada. And that also maps to trends that we've found in other parts of the world, in Italy, Argentina, Brazil, and other parts of the world. So the conversion types, the types of conversions are mostly for-profit to cooperatives, but we also see conversions between nonprofits and co-ops, a smaller percentage, mergers and acquisitions in Quebec in the funeral sector. Fiona will talk about them in a few minutes. You see mergers and acquisitions, so co-ops that are used to acquire businesses and then create co-ops, and then partial conversions in a unique Quebec model called worker shareholder co-ops that are only found in Quebec. And that's where employees form a co-op and form an ownership partnership with traditional owners. And we do see that that's a driver of conversions to co-ops in Canada, or in Quebec in particular. And I'll pass it on to Fiona now.
Hi, everyone. I just put into the chat the link to this cool tool, just jumping off of what Marcelo was just saying. We were working with CMC, Co-ops and Mutuals Canada, to bring the conversion filter, if I can use it that way, into their mapping process. So I just wanted to show that this exists here on their website, and you can go and you can use the filter for co-op to see sort of all of these different where they're located, what kinds they are, what types of co-ops, what industries they're in and across Canada. So just a cool tool for all of you as a little takeaway. Thank you, Marcelo, if you could advance. Marcelo's provided a really nice entry point into all of these businesses, as well as nonprofit organizations, mostly businesses that have converted to co-ops. So we wanted to just give you a sense of why some of them are interested in this. And so, as Marcelo has alluded to, co-op conversions happen all around the world. And so this list here that we've pulled together really comes from the generation of research that's been done around the world. So not just in Canada, but also the experiences of these BCCs experiences. So we see time and time again that while the co-op model, as we many of us know in the co-op world, can sometimes take a longer time to actually work through some of those initial pieces, once they're done, they stick around. So that that sticky factor is one of the big reasons why people are becoming more and more interested in BCCs. So that twice the success rates of regular types of businesses. This is a really important factor that I think we all need to learn more about and expand that awareness as well. We also see that idea of sharing those ownership costs and the opportunities that can happen, especially when we're talking about folks who maybe have sweat equity to put in, but not a whole lot of like financial equity to put in, or maybe you're finding it too risky to maybe put all of their equity in. And so sharing both the labor intensive aspect as well as the financial aspect in terms of those cost sharing is also another really attractive reason and motivation for converting to a co-op. Working together can also sort of ease that transition. You don't have it all sitting on your shoulders like that sole entrepreneur, but now you're sharing in a much more social and collective way that entrepreneurship. Marcelo, I'm going to just ask you to advance the slide. We wanted to also breathe a little life into some of those numbers and data and stats that Marcelo was saying. I would encourage you, and I'll put the link in just one moment, to our website where we've got a lot of detail about these case studies that we've done. But again, just to breathe some life into it. The Kincardine Ladies Fitness Co-op is located in Kincardine, Ontario. This is a small rural town, and where there was a fitness, Curves, for those of you who know Curves. They were a multinational franchise that ran individual businesses in towns all across Canada, cities all across Canada. A group of active members were very disappointed when their Curves was going to close. And so if fitness isn't the perfect way to sort of step into that ownership moment as literally as a member, not just a member of your, the fitness business, but in fact a member of your fitness gym. And you can see here that they now call it Our Gym. That this is a perfect place for conversions to happen. In fact, I don't understand why more fitness areas are not made as co-ops, because this is this perfect model. We don't see any dollars leaking out of their local community. They can make it exactly how they want to make it, and ultimately serve their exact purposes, because in this case, it's a nonprofit. And so there's no one to actually pay in this case either. I'm going to ask Marcelo to advance. Here's another example. This one is out in Nova Scotia. And in this case, the Glitter Bean Cafe really immobilized out of a labor dispute that was happening within the cafe. And through a process, as we know, co-ops take those processes, they were able to come together as members, the workers, to be able to own and this cafe. And in particular, not only was it a labor dispute, but it was also the creation and maintenance and to also continue to have a space that was a safe space for two-spirited LGBT community within the Halifax region. I'm going to ask Marcelo to advance. Thank you. Here's the one about grocery stores. So often the small community that is really finds their hub spot is their grocery store. And when that grocery store exits the community, now the community members are driving 50, 100 kilometers to be able to access the basic of groceries. In this case, this community in Northern Ontario, which has a very strong Francophone community as a part of it, they were able to come together. Now, they had a bit of a history of this, having done some of this kind of collective work together before. But they said, we don't want our grocery store to go, and so how can we keep it? And they did a huge community campaign to be able to own it as a community. And so to this day, Moonbeam grocery store continues to thrive and is in fact grown twofold in terms of both size and also in terms of their sales. So I want to just turn us quickly to Quebec. And as Marcelo said, there are lots and lots of examples in Quebec of BCCs. I'm just going to touch base on these three. The first one is the ambulance industry. We see a lot of examples of BCCs in terms of that paramedic, that space. Again, this is driven by creating a better workplace for the workers, and as well as a deep investing of the government in this case around the development of and the transfer of ownership into a co-op for in the ambulance sector in Quebec. To move to the next one, the funeral co-op, and here, so we have the ambulance and now we have the funerals. The funeral sector has a juggernaut of the Federation for Funeral Co-ops in Quebec, and they have seen the opportunity as all these smaller funeral homes and small communities were being eaten up or courted by multinational corporations. And so they said, hey, I think we can do this better. And so they created almost a turnkey operation by which they can now, and they do it way ahead of time, to go in to those business owners of the small funeral homes to say, hey, let's have a conversation about this and what can we do to bring you into the fold and to make this a co-op. Let's turn to the last one, which is a media co-op. As we've seen all around the world, and Canada has also suffered in terms of the media industry, as the sale of advertising and print media has gone down. This is a conglomerate of independent media services in Quebec that we're really struggling to keep on going. And again, this is an example of where their workers stepped into the fray and said, we want to continue, and how can we do this best? And so they converted into a co-op. I'm going to ask Marcelo to advance. Thank you. Some key takeaways, and I'll just be really quick on this one. We can see that there are some key catalyzers or motivators. So that idea of business succession is a big piece. That idea of saving jobs, or that worker mobilization, or that community mobilization, meaning that we want to keep that anchor business in our community. We see examples. What is really important, what came out in all of our case studies, is the very significant and important role of what we call the previous owner. And so whoever it is that's selling that business and helping to convert it into a co-op, they play a really, really key role in helping that to be able to happen in a timely manner, in an efficient manner, perhaps even by staying around and supporting, either in terms of resources or advice, or in terms of like maybe a sort of that patient capital that can be then where the workers or the community can buy it out. Marcelo's going to dive a little bit deeper. I jumped over that middle point there about the enabling environment. And what we found, let's just turn it to you, Marcelo, and you can jump into that.
I did want to quickly also mention that we found 4 streams. So you can, if you look at business conversions to co-ops in Canada, they tend to fall under these 4 streams that we found: conversions to worker multi-stakeholder co-ops, community anchor business conversions, which are some of the ones that Fiona mentioned. They're really important because they're anchor businesses in communities, resource-based conversions, and services-based conversions. So, why do they fall into these streams, and what makes a key BCC ecosystem or enabling environment? Well, we find that in Canada, like other parts of the world, you need local people to catalyze it. You need people locally to know about conversions to co-ops. And most of the time, 90% of the time, business owners don't know about this option. Less so do workers, and professionals don't know much about them either. So you cooperative developers or professionals that do know about conversions to co-ops is really important. And where communities have them, they will happen. For example, Brian Eiler in Toronto and in Ontario. That's why some of them have emerged in Ontario. And in Quebec, you have organizations, associations, and federations that are quite knowledgeable of them. But then also they have to be supported by supportive policy and legislation. Quebec has these, more so than the rest of Canada. And other parts of the world is really, really strong in this. So France and Italy have really strong support policies and legislation in place to ease the process. Financing and funding mechanisms, of course, key stakeholders, that's education, information capacity, knowledge building, social capital, social networks. Where you find a conversion, you'll see more conversions. So where you have them, there will be more of them. It's kind of kind of a circular argument, but it's true. And then a cooperative culture and a collective memory of past cooperative experience. If we're just talking to Nicole about, Natalie, about the role of co-ops in the development of universal healthcare in Canada, right? So that's, so co-ops foster other co-ops and other community benefits as well. But the rest of Canada is ad hoc. And I'll get into that in a minute. So there isn't kind of a unified model, a unified ecosystem, whereas in Quebec, you do find them. You do find them because you do find more of them because there's a richer ecosystem. And the ecosystem consists of this. I won't get into the details of all of them. We'd be happy to talk about some of them, but political supports, technical supports, and financial supports. So there's already processes and experts in place that can facilitate this process, fund the process, consult through the process, and see a cooperative conversion to completion as well, right? So that's really important. The rest of Canada, ad hoc. You don't have this technical, political, and financial support mechanism to the extent that you do in Canada. It's not as unified. So it's mostly ad hoc, and it mostly depends on where you are in Canada. So organizations that have taken a leadership role in the rest of Canada are, of course, the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation. Hazel is here, Hazel Corcoran. So so I'm sure she has lots to say about this. We have talked much about this and worked with them. Co-op Zone. Anyways, these are some of the cooperatives first, right, in Saskatchewan, Van City Credit Union, etc. So these are the kind of associations and organizations in the cooperative sector that have taken a lead role. And there are some financial and technical supports, but again, it's ad hoc. So it tends to be local cooperative developers, knowledgeable lawyers, accountants, and evaluators. There aren't many of them across Canada, but they're emerging, and more and more of them are coming to know the BCC model. But other modes of financing that might not necessarily be for co-ops directly, but if it's a community-oriented nonprofit organization, for example, co-ops can tap into community bonds or grants from community foundations or social impact financing. So RRSPs and TFSAs. So these are some of the innovative ways that conversions to co-ops have happened in the rest of Canada. There are resources, but more ad hoc and less kind of well-known. So what's needed to create a robust cooperative ecosystem in Canada? And we're kind of pointing towards the questions we want to engage with you all today. Political will right across the board is needed. We find it more in Quebec than you do in other parts of Canada. But favorable taxations, for example, exemptions on capital gains to owners that sell to employees, and other kind of innovative models that have been discussed. Education awareness, capacity building, better funding mechanisms, successful stories of BCCs. This is what we heard from the co-op sector and from the key informants that we interviewed. And these side quotes that we have in these slides are from our key informants, like Hazel and like others that we talked to. And so this is what's the impetus for developing our case studies, which are really accessible. They're not, heavy academic, but they're very accessible, readable case studies in different formats. So that's to kind of, communicate these stories and inspire people to hopefully engage in conversions as well as a resource. And we don't have to go very far. We don't have to go to Italy or France, although we can draw inspiration from them. But these success stories exist right here in Canada. So that's the other big takeaway that we wanted to communicate with our research project. I think I'm going to pass it on to Fiona, and I think we're ready to have a discussion.
Yeah. I also just want to flag in the there's some good links in the chat, and Daphne Nelson put in Coactive, which is a newer player in the BC ecosystem for supporting conversions to co-ops. Thanks, Daphne. Now we're going to get you to do some of your work, and I know Natalie will, ask us a few questions first. So we're just going to put these out there for everyone to start to brew. So we want to really ground you in your community and thinking about your community. And so our first sort of question we'd like you to discuss is there a business, or maybe it's a nonprofit, in your community whose owner is near retirement, or perhaps is looking for and exploring? They're that one of the 14% who actually are thinking about succession planning. And so maybe you are one of these people and you're called a co-op curious here. So do you think they have thought about a BCC, or perhaps have you thought about a BCC? Would a BCC option appeal to you, those business owners? Who do you think would be the members, the workers, the community, a multi-stakeholder? What would need to be in place in order for this BCC to happen? And so here we're really asking you to sort of think about that, not so much the process, but more like what kind of players need to be in place, or what kinds of pieces of that puzzle. Then we'd like also to ask you to think a little bit about that BCC ecosystem in your community. And so are there pieces missing? You saw a great big long list of all these different players that are in Quebec that are really quite, as Marcelo said, really quite networked, and they fall onto each other nicely as people move through that process of conversion. As we've said, there are lots of great players in the rest of Canada, but maybe that sort of turnkey process is not necessarily as present, where you've got those technical supports, that political supports, and also the financial supports in place. And so perhaps you can think of some of those gaps that need to be filled in terms of the ecosystem. So we're going to ask you to sort of meditate a little bit on some of these questions, and we'll turn it back to Natalie to take us into the next moment.
Great. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. My mind is just turning and turning. I'm really glad that in the breakout sessions, we're going to be getting right down to our local and like can do in our communities. But thinking about like wider, more provincially across co-op land. So I noticed on the map, there wasn't a lot of action happening in Saskatchewan, despite what we were just talking before about the robust history and current there's a lot of action in the co-op sector in Saskatchewan, and always has been, and a lot of the roots are here, and yet this doesn't seem to be happening. So beyond our communities, at the like wider level, policy and governance and things, what could we be doing here in Saskatchewan and across co-op land to really help cooperate together, I guess, to help build those ecosystems that we need to facilitate these, so that people are thinking about these? Like, I know you're doing that. What can we, as your audience here today, do?
Is that a question for
It
Fiona?
is.
Oh, okay.
Put you on the spot.
Believe me, I really wanted there to be lots of conversions in Saskatchewan in particular, but we couldn't find any. We tried, and I'm not saying there aren't now, and there haven't been, but at the moment that we were doing our research, we didn't find any. Having said that, there are lots of co-ops. This is just one way of forming a co-op, right? I just wanted to be clear. It's not the only way and the primary way, but if any of you know any, we're open to, please let us know of coffee shops and any kind of business that's in your area that we haven't captured. Let us know about it, yeah, but
no, for sure, and we will. I'm sure Co-ops First is very active in other places.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully we'll find out about something that we didn't know about. But.
Yes, and also in the Indigenous communities as well. There have been conversions that have been captured as such, like gas stations that have been bought out and converted to Indigenous organizations, but they tend to be social enterprise, not necessarily co-ops. And so we are tracking one in Saskatchewan. We're working with Shirley Thompson at the University of Saskatchewan. Not Saskatchewan, Manitoba, University of Manitoba. And there is one in Manitoba, but that's another area that we perhaps need to kind of think harder about. But I don't know, Fiona, do you have any comments?
Yeah, our friends at Co-ops First are doing some pretty amazing work. And so anybody who is curious about the how-to of this definitely should go and look at Co-op's First's website, where they've got a ton of resources and guidebooks and people like on the hotline ready to help with this So I think they are the number one spot, certainly in the prairies, to be able to work in this space.
Right. So you highlighted some sectors and businesses like gyms that are ideally suited to this process. And I was just wondering, like you brought up one of the Quebec was a news organization, and I'm thinking about, those, the anchor businesses and communities that you were talking about. I was thinking about, the impending demise of local news, and if this could be something that would help take that on and make sure that we have local news, which is so important to our media landscape, or any other sectors that just that you think are ideally suited. You mentioned a bunch, but I just wondered if there were any others that you in particular, after your studies, thought, well, this would be ideal.
Natalie, I really want to jump in here if I can. I think my hand is too similar to the color of my wall to see my raised hand, but I just want to point out in Saskatchewan, there already is a worker cooperative news entity, which is Planet S Magazine and Prairie Dog. It's not a conversion, it's a startup.
Yeah.
It needs support, like every type of, however it's owned, local news, right? Because it's struggling, right? They don't get ads anymore the way they used to. It's had to shrink. I don't know how much longer it will survive, honestly. It's really surviving by the sheer will of the people that are either founders or longtime continuing members. But the general topic about Saskatchewan, Co-op First is doing amazing work in Saskatchewan. I can't explain why, but the worker cooperative movement has been very weak in Saskatchewan for a long time, and more so than the other prairie provinces. And it's the opposite with every other kind of co-op. I almost feel like the other kinds of co-ops are like occupying the space for co-ops, and so people don't have any room in their brains to think about this. It's like in law we say they occupy the field. But I wanted to just speak a bit more generally, because our federation has been trying for quite some time, as Marcelo knows, and Fiona being on our committee, maybe some other folk, Juliet Kago here is as an advisor to our board. We've been thinking long and hard and researching and implementing, trying to implement an ecosystem like in Quebec, except learning what to do and also what not to do, because it's certainly not perfect, but it's light years ahead of anywhere else, as the research, shows where the numbers are and so on. But I think right now, we have a whole comprehensive strategy that we've been trying to get government attention on. Right now, we have a really unique opportunity, because with the employee ownership trusts having made it into the budget, with social capital partners who have a lot deeper pockets than we do and a lot more kind of political connections and will and so on, I think that they've really opened a door that we're going to try to drive the worker co-op truck directly through. And it's going reasonably well, but I do want to make a plea. If anybody here has any connections, especially with federal liberals, that they're willing to help get myself and others from our committee, Alain Roy and others, any meetings. I'm going to be in Ottawa twice, once 2 weeks away, and once for the CMC Congress in June. And so I think, I'm building in extra time around those, and we're actually in the process of hiring GR consultants today that we've chosen to help us get meetings. So I think if it's possible ever to build any part of the ecosystem, like I get to say my favorite sentence that I only get to say like every 5 to 10 years, like we're doing a federal lobby and it's going well. I mean, I'm optimistic, but I have been before and it doesn't always work. The government better not fall. I mean, because if it does, like all bets are off on all of it. But EOTs are a great kind of, it's got the feds saying positive things about employee ownership. And that doesn't happen very much in my memory, which goes back a ways. I don't remember them ever doing that. So the plea is out. Text me or my email in the chat. Also want to mention on our JEDI project, we do have an upcoming session in Halifax that I'll be at along with Juliet Kago, who's here on the call, and Janelle Maxwell, and it's going to be streamed as well. So hopefully folks
You
can
put that in the chat, please, Hazel?
Yes, that's in the chat. Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning the EOT, the Employee Ownership Trust initiative that got onto the budget. You know, we've been working together to get the worker co-ops in that space as well. And it's great to see, you know, how it's subtly not, you know, it's gotten onto the like through the back door we got in, but there is I was interviewed on CBC together with John Schell, and if you want to like comparing and contrasting worker co-ops to EOTs and just if you're interested in the differences and similarities.
That was going to be my next question, so I didn't have to ask it, and I'm really glad that it came up like this. And you just gave us, Hazel, something we can do right now is talk to any federal member of parliament. I'd like to move on to the breakout conversation so that all of these heads get together and have a conversation and not just looking at us. So again, these conversations are an opportunity to network, get to know each other, and really collaborate and exchange ideas and get thinking about how to do things in our communities. So Stan's going to break you out into groups. When you get there, just mention who you are, where you're from, where you work, where you study, or what brought you here today to this particular conversation. So again, the question to your breakout groups is you thinking, is there a business in your community whose owner is near retirement or is looking for a succession plan? And what is missing from the BCC ecosystem in your community, and how can it be filled? Those conversations could have gone on forever, I'm sure. One very, very, very good idea, actionable right now, is to talk about BCCs to your local Rotary Club, where the majority of people are business owners about to retire, probably. So anyway, that I appreciate everyone's input, and I'm sure all the breakout rooms had great ideas, and please forward them to us if you can. I want to wrap up and be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you for participating in this rich and insightful talk. I'm sure there are lots of ideas coming out of this and hopefully some action to help facilitate these processes and beat the gray wave. So we will be sharing a recording of this session. Stan will be in touch with you in the next day or so. So again, this is our last co-op conversation of the season, I guess. We're going to take a summer break and go to conferences and take some vacations, hopefully. And we will return on the first Wednesday of September. Speaker to be announced, but please share your ideas if you like. We really appreciate these monthly online gatherings that were started in the middle of COVID in November 2021 with the hopes of finding some opportunities to connect and network and share ideas while we were all locked away in our homes. So thank you everyone who attended today and throughout the series. And we look forward to inviting you back in the fall and hopefully continuing these amazing conversations. So in the meantime, you can stay up to date on what we're doing on our website, through our newsletter, and through our social media. I appreciate everyone coming today, and thank you so very much. And we will see you soon, hopefully before September, but if not, we'll see you then.